Disclaimer. This content is a work of fiction. All characters are fictional. The story is not based on real events or actual legal proceedings. Before the gavel fell. Episode 6. The Green Between Decisions. Chris Katagis didn't want a meeting. He didn't want a hearing. He didn't want another notice or role or title attached to his name. He wanted a quick meal. Sweeney's sat just outside the courthouse in New Haven, close enough that you could still hear the doors open and close, far enough that it felt unofficial. A stainless steel cart, a weathered umbrella. The same smell that had been there longer than most of the people walking past it. Chris stepped up without hesitation. "A Georgia hot," he said. Sweeney nodded. No menu, no questions. "Ketchup and onions." The grill hissed as the hot dog hit the heat. The onions followed, sharp and familiar. Chris stepped aside and waited. For a moment, everything felt normal. The courthouse loomed behind him, heavy with stone and silence. People moved in and out like they always did. Lawyers walking fast, clerks with badges swinging slightly as they crossed the steps, defendants standing still, staring at phones they weren't really reading. Sweeney handed him the hot dog wrapped in wax paper. Chris took a bite immediately. The snap of the casing, the heat, the spice. Some habits didn't need explanation. He leaned against the railing and ate slowly, watching the courthouse doors. This was the space between things. Not inside the system, not fully outside it, just close enough to remember who he was before his name started appearing where it didn't belong. When he finished, he folded the wax paper carefully. Always folded. Another habit. He tossed it into the trash beside the cart and took a breath. Instead of heading home, Chris turned toward the green. The New Haven green sat open and wide, a rectangle of grass framed by churches and old buildings that had seen more arguments than most courtrooms ever would. It was quieter here, but not empty. People walked dogs. Students crossed diagonally without caring about paths. Office workers ate lunches on benches, scrolling without looking up. Chris walked slowly. The green had always done that to him. Slowed things down, made it harder for thoughts to rush. As he crossed the grass, he thought about how many people had passed through the same space, on their way to court. How many had stood where he was standing now, waiting for decisions they didn't control. Long before this courthouse, long before this system, he thought about the Amistad, not the details, not the case law, just the image. Men who had been brought here in chains. Men who had walked through New Haven toward a courtroom, where the outcome would decide whether they were property or people. They had crossed the same ground. Different century, different stakes, same walk. Chris stopped near the center of the green and looked back toward the courthouse. History had weight. Not because it repeated itself, but because it lingered. Because places remembered even when systems pretended they didn't. He wondered if those men had felt what he was feeling now. Not fear exactly, and not hope either. Uncertainty. The sense that the process mattered more than the person inside it. Chris sat on a bench and watched people pass. A jogger slowed to tie a shoe. A couple argued quietly near a tree. A man in a suit stood still, staring at the courthouse longer than necessary. Nothing unusual. And yet, Chris felt it again. The pressure, the subtle awareness that the system did not like pauses, did not like reflection, did not like spaces where things could be questioned instead of processed. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Chris didn't take it out right away. He waited. Then he checked. External movement logged. Location, public grounds. Status, observed. Chris let out a slow breath. He hadn't done anything. He hadn't accessed a record. He hadn't spoken to a clerk. He hadn't attended a hearing. He had eaten a hot dog. He had walked. He had stood on grass. That was enough. He stood and continued walking, circling the green instead of cutting straight across. He passed the churches, their doors closed, their stone faces unreadable. Places built to judge. Places built to forgive. Both quiet now. As he walked, Chris realized something unsettling. The system wasn't just reacting to him. It was reacting to context, to where he stood, to what he remembered, to the fact that history had happened here before without permission. His phone vibrated again. Containment advisory updated. Chris stopped walking. He didn't read further. He already understood. The courthouse controlled records. The system controlled outcomes. But places like the Green, they controlled memory. And memory was dangerous. Chris sat again, this time facing away from the courthouse. He thought about how verdicts were read aloud, how words turned decisions into facts, how silence kept things flexible, adjustable. He thought about the men of the Amistad, whose fate had hinged not just on law, but on whether the court would see them as subjects or something less. Chris smiled faintly. The categories hadn't changed much. Subject, observer, constraint, different words. Same logic. His phone vibrated a third time. Historical proximity. Noted. Chris shook his head slowly. You're reaching, he muttered. The system didn't respond. It never did. Chris stood and headed toward the edge of the Green, back toward the street, back toward motion. He didn't want to linger anymore. As he stepped off the grass, the feeling eased slightly. The pressure lessened. That told him everything he needed to know. The system could tolerate routine. It could tolerate silence. What it couldn't tolerate was reflection in places where reflection had mattered before. Chris looked back one last time at the Green. People still crossed it freely, laughing, talking, unaware. He wondered how long that would last. As he walked away, his phone buzzed one final time. Observer status maintained. Location. Sensitivity. Active. Chris slipped the phone back into his pocket. Somewhere behind him, Sweeney's grill sizzled. The courthouse doors opened and closed, and the Green stayed exactly where it had always been. Quiet, waiting. If you enjoyed this story, consider supporting the channel by liking the video, sharing it with someone who enjoys fictional court stories, and subscribing for future episodes. Thank you for listening.